You've heard it a dozen times. Sell your big house, dump the second car, cut loose the rental, fire your expensive advisor, and stop bailing out your adult kids, all before you retire. It sounds like a clean list. Like someone finally distilled retirement planning down to 5 simple moves. And if you've been watching financial videos for any length of time, you've probably nodded along. But here's what that advice gets wrong. That second car you're told to sell? The saving sounds like $5,000 a year, maybe more. But when you lose your independence, strain your marriage, or have no backup for a medical appointment at 3 in the afternoon, the real cost can be $50,000 or more. Not hypothetically, practically. Every one of these 5 things has a hidden variable, a tax timing issue, an emotional cost, a healthcare gap, an OAS clawback you didn't see coming, a family dynamic that no spreadsheet can capture. And if you follow the standard advice without understanding those variables, what looks like a smart move can become one of the most expensive mistakes of your retirement. In this video, I'm going to walk you through each of the 5 and show you exactly where the generic advice breaks down for Canadian retirees. We'll start with the one that affects most couples first. If you're between 55 and 65 and you're trying to separate smart planning from harmful oversimplifications, hit subscribe, because the math only works when it fits your real life. Let's start with a real number. Say you're keeping a second car, a 10-year-old compact, nothing fancy. You drive it maybe 8,000 kilometers a year. When you add up insurance, maintenance, registration, and depreciation, you're looking at roughly $2,200 a year, maybe $2,500 depending on where you live. Now here's where the standard advice goes off the rails. A lot of retirement planners will tell you that saving $2,200 a year is like having an extra $55,000 in your nest egg. That's the 25x rule. Multiply your annual saving by 25 to find the equivalent retirement capital. And on paper, $55,000 sounds like serious money. But the 25x rule only measures what you save. It doesn't measure what you lose. Think about your actual week. If one spouse has a dialysis appointment 3 times a week, and the other needs the car for errands, groceries, or picking up a grandkid, what happens? You start scheduling around each other. You start relying on Uber, or a neighbor, or a family member who has their own schedule. That friction has a cost, and it compounds quietly. I've watched couples go through this. One car made total sense on paper. In practice, it created a layer of daily stress that neither of them anticipated. And when they sat down and actually tallied the ride-sharing costs 6 months in, the so-called saving had shrunk to almost nothing. And that's before you factor in the emotional cost. Losing independent mobility in your early retirement years, when you're still healthy enough to go where you want, when you want, is a quality of life hit that no spreadsheet captures. The average CPP benefit at 65 right now is about $760 a month. If you're living on a tight budget, the freedom to move around without negotiating with your spouse is worth real money. If someone has told you that keeping a second car means you're being financially irresponsible, that's not a math argument. That's a lifestyle judgment that ignores your actual situation. Now, maybe your second car is paid off and you genuinely never drive it. Maybe it's sitting in the driveway costing you insurance on a vehicle nobody uses. That's a completely different calculation, and in that case, selling makes sense. The point isn't to always keep the car. The point is to run your own numbers, not someone else's. The second car trap is real, but it's nothing compared to the advice most Canadians get about their biggest asset. Let's talk about the house. Now let's talk about the biggest one, the family home. The standard advice here is consistent: sell, downsize, unlock your equity, and use that money to fund your retirement. And in many cases, it's exactly the right call. But the version of this advice you usually hear leaves out 3 things that can completely change the outcome. Here's the math that gets presented. If you own a detached home in Toronto right now, you're likely sitting on roughly $1,200,000 in value. If you sell and buy a condo in a smaller city, say London, Ontario, you might pay around $500,000. That frees up $700,000 in tax-free equity. Under the principal residence exemption, you owe nothing to CRA on that gain. If you invest that $700,000 and draw it down at 4% a year, you're adding $28,000 of extra income annually to your retirement. That's not a trivial number. So why doesn't this always work out the way it looks on paper? First, the income that downsizing generates is one time. You get that $700,000 once. After that, your new city is your new city. And if the cost of living there turns out to be higher than expected, or if your health situation changes and you need regular specialist care, you're absorbing those costs from the same pot you were planning to draw from. Moving to a community without a major hospital can add $3,000 to $5,000 a year in travel costs just for specialist appointments. If your new income from the $700,000 is $28,000 a year, and $5,000 of that is going straight to medical travel, your real gain is $23,000. And if that extra income pushes you closer to the OAS clawback threshold, which sits at $95,323 net income in 2026, you may be giving back 15 cents of every dollar above that line. The clean $28,000 number gets messier fast. I used to think downsizing was almost always the right move. I changed my mind after watching what happened with someone I worked with closely. She sold her house, moved to a retirement community about 2 hours from the city, and the place was genuinely beautiful. She loved it for about 8 months. Then her grandson was born, and her daughter was struggling, and she needed to be close. 2 years after she moved back. The transaction costs alone, selling, buying, legal fees, movers, ran over $60,000. The math had said sell, life said stay, and no one had helped her think through what life was actually going to ask of her. The resilience path, staying, using a HELOC for bridging income if needed, or looking seriously at a reverse mortgage if that fits your situation, isn't giving up. It's often the decision that keeps your options open longest. The house is the one asset where the hidden cost is the hardest to quantify. Once you understand that, the rental property decision starts to look a lot clearer. If you own a rental property, you've probably had the conversation at least once. Someone tells you to sell it before you retire, simplify your life, and stop being a landlord. And someone else tells you to hold it, because it's cash flow and a hard asset in an uncertain market. Both sides of that argument are partially right, but neither one mentions the thing that actually determines whether selling makes sense, how the sale is taxed, and whether there's a way to manage that. Let's say you bought a rental property for $300,000, and it's now worth $500,000. Your capital gain is $200,000. In 2026, the capital gains inclusion rate for individuals is 50% on the first $250,000 of gains in a year. So your taxable gain is $100,000, not $200,000. That changes the math. But here's the part most people don't know about: the capital gains reserve. CRA allows you to spread the recognition of a capital gain over up to 5 years if you take back a vendor mortgage or structure the sale in a qualifying way. In a straightforward case, that means you could be adding roughly $20,000 of taxable income per year instead of $100,000 all at once. For someone managing their income carefully around OAS and CPP, that difference can be significant. Now, the other side of the equation. If your rental property is generating $6,000 to $10,000 in net income after expenses, and you could sell it, Invest the proceeds and draw 4% annually, you'd be getting roughly $8,000 a year from a $200,000 gain after sale. The income numbers can end up similar, but the risk profile is completely different. A balanced portfolio doesn't call you at 11 at night because the furnace stopped working. It doesn't leave you chasing a tenant for back rent in a tribunal process that drags on for months. It doesn't sit vacant while you're paying the mortgage yourself because the market slowed and you couldn't find a qualified applicant. I've seen this scenario play out badly. A couple in their early 60s holding 2 rentals, confident the income would carry them through retirement. Then one property had a major water damage event. The other had a non-paying tenant who took 8 months to remove legally, and their retirement income for that year came in at a fraction of what they'd planned. They weren't financially ruined, but they were exhausted and angry, and the stress bled into everything else in their life. The question isn't just what the property earns. It's what it costs you in time, energy, and risk, and whether that trade is still worth it once you're retired and those resources are harder to replace. If you decide to sell, plan the timing. Talk to your accountant about the capital gains reserve before you list. And if the property was ever your principal residence, ask about a partial exemption because that can meaningfully reduce the gain. Once you've worked through the rental decision, there's a 4th thing on the sell list that most people forget about until it's too late. And unlike the car, the house, and the rental, this one has been quietly costing you money every single year. This one doesn't feel like an asset you own, but it is. It's the drag on your investment returns that's been running in the background every year for the last decade or two. And for a lot of Canadians, it's one of the most expensive things they'll ever not notice. Here's the math. Take a $500,000 investment portfolio earning 6% a year before fees. If you're paying a 2% management expense ratio, which is completely normal for Canadian mutual funds, your ending value after 20 years is roughly $1,100,000. If you're paying 0.3%, which is typical for a low-cost index ETF, your ending value is closer to $1,550,000. The difference is about $450,000, not because of performance, because of cost. I'll be honest with you. I used to pay a 2.2% MER on my own mutual fund. I believed my fund manager was worth it. He'd had a couple of strong years, and I figured the expertise justified the cost. What I didn't understand at the time was that the fee wasn't just coming out of my returns. It was compounding against me. The house was winning quietly, year after year. That's embarrassing to admit, but it's exactly why I pay close attention to fees now. The conversation people avoid is whether to switch, and there are real reasons to be careful. If your mutual funds are sitting outside a registered account and you have unrealized gains, selling them triggers a capital gain. If you're in a segregated fund with a deferred sales charge, exiting early can cost you. But inside a rrsp or TFSA, you can switch from a high MER mutual fund to a low-cost ETF without any tax consequence. That's worth knowing. And if your funds are in a non-registered account, ask your advisor about an in-kind transfer to a portfolio with lower fees, rather than selling and triggering the gain immediately. Log into your RRSP or TFSA and look up the MER on what you hold. If you don't know where to find it, it's on your fund's fact sheet or your account statement. If it's above 1.5%, that's a conversation worth having. Not necessarily a decision to make tomorrow, but a number you should know. The fees don't announce themselves. They work quietly. And by the time most people notice, they've already paid them for years. Now, the 5th thing on the list isn't an investment. It isn't a property, it's a relationship, and it might be the hardest sell of all. This is the one that doesn't show up on any balance sheet, but it shows up in a lot of retirement plans. You've been supporting your adult kids, or thinking about it. Maybe it's a down payment, Maybe it's helping with rent while they get established. Maybe it's the grandkids' activities, or covering a gap when one of them loses a job. And someone, at some point, has told you to stop, that every dollar you give away in retirement is costing you more than $1. They're right about the math, but they're usually wrong about how to have the conversation. Here's the actual cost breakdown. Say you give $10,000 this year to help with a down payment. If that $10,000 had stayed in your RRSP and grown at 5% for 10 years, it would be roughly $16,300. That's $6,300 in lost growth. And if that gift pushes your net income above the OAS clawback threshold, which is $95,323 in 2026, you lose 15 cents of OAS for every dollar above the line. On $10,000, that's another $1,500 gone. Add it up. The $10,000 gift has a true cost of somewhere around $17,800, nearly double what it looks like. Now, most people reading that math either feel a cold shock or a wave of guilt. Neither one is helpful. Because the reality is that a lot of Canadian retirees never get close to the OAS clawback threshold. So that piece of the calculation doesn't apply to them. And for many families, especially those from cultures where supporting family is simply what you do, the idea of stopping entirely isn't realistic or right. I remember sitting around the kitchen table watching my parents go through this. My dad wanted to give my sister a down payment. My mom was scared of running out of money before she was 80. They both had strong feelings, and they never really resolved it. It sat between them for years. What they needed wasn't a spreadsheet. They needed a framework for talking about it together. So here's a way to think about it that doesn't require choosing between your retirement and your family. Set a number you can give without it affecting your core plan. Not a figure based on what your child needs, a figure based on what you can give sustainably. Use your TFSA if you can, because those withdrawals don't add to your taxable income and won't trigger a clawback. Instead of a lump sum gift, consider contributing to their RRSP. If they have contribution room, you get no tax deduction, but the money goes into a tax-sheltered account in their name, and have the conversation openly. Something like, I want to help you, and I also need to make sure I don't end up needing your help in 20 years. That's not a rejection. That's an honest conversation. The families that navigate this well aren't the ones that cut off support. They're the ones that set a structure around it before it becomes a crisis. Let's bring this back together. The second car isn't just a $2,200 annual cost. It's your daily independence and your marriage friction level. The house isn't just equity waiting to be unlocked. It's your community, your medical access, and your family network. The rental property isn't just a yield calculation. It's your time, your energy, and your risk tolerance in retirement. The fees aren't just a number in the fine print. They're decades of compound growth working against you instead of for you. And your adult children aren't a line item on your cash flow statement. They're your family. And that relationship doesn't resolve itself through math. The advice to sell all 5 of these things before you retire isn't wrong because it's dishonest. It's wrong because it's generic. The same move that frees one person can trap another. And the only way to know which side you're on is to run your own numbers, with your own life as the variable. At Brian's Canadian Retirement Playbook, that's the whole idea. Not to hand you a checklist and tell you the hard work is done, but to give you the tools to look at the standard advice, understand what's driving it, and decide what actually fits your situation. If that's the kind of retirement planning you're looking for, hit subscribe. There are no perfect answers here, but there are better questions. And asking the right ones before you make a big decision is worth more than following any list.